Thank you. So welcome to the dialogue on nature, food and forest. And this is part of the She Changes Climate Summit that we are hosting with many partners. We're very, very happy to have leaders from around the world with us today. And also Ryan, who is a man, and we're very proud of you, Ryan. You are the pioneer. Well done for your courage. I'm going to start just by saying who I am, and I will be facilitating this session, and I'm going to ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves. So just to say your name, organization, and also just one sentence about nature. You know, why is nature important to you as a person? So my name is Elise Buckle. I'm the co-founder of She Changes Climate together with Bianca Pitt and Antoinette Vermillier. I'm also the co-president of Climate and Sustainability, and I'm very, very pleased to be your facilitator for this session today. Nature is very close to my heart, and I would say why it's so important to me right now is if I think about the last 2 years, I've been going through, COVID crisis, just like everybody else. We have the climate crisis. I went through quite a big political crisis. And I think that it's only by going back to nature and reconnecting with nature and with ourselves that we can bring peace to the world. So this is just a message I wanted to share with all of you today. Okay, over to you, Ryan. Who you are, who you represent, and one sentence about nature.
Hello, everyone. I will address why I'm a guy and why I'm here today. But my name is Ryan Qasim. I work at a youth-led organization called Youth for Nature. It's by youth for youth. And I think why nature is important for me, because as our societies become really complicated, I think it simplifies things when you go back to nature, what you should eat, how you should eat it, what kind of things you should grow, how to preserve biodiversity, why it's important. So I think it provides that philosophical aspect to me at the personal level.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Beautiful. Leila, over to you.
Yes, hi everyone. So I'm Leila Yassin, and I work at the Rainforest Alliance as Global Advocacy Manager. And I can say very simply, nature for me is life. And this is why it's important, and life is precious. Thank you, Elise.
Thank you, beautiful. Nicole, and Nicole also wrote a book about femininity and nature, but yeah, please, over to you.
Thank you, Elise. My name is Nicole Schwab. I'm responsible for the Trillion Trees platform at the World Economic Forum. And nature, I mean, why is nature important to me? It's almost like asking, why is breathing important? We are nature, we're part of nature. We receive everything from nature. So there is no life without it, no human life. So I think that's why it's fundamental.
Thank you, Nicole. And I met Nicole a few weeks ago, just walking through the forest here, and it was quite a deep experience. So thank you so much. Okay, Marie-Laure, over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thrilled to be here. So I'm Marie-Laure Schaffelberger. I head up ESG and stewardship for the Pictet Group, which is a financial institution. I'm also the president of Sustainable Finance Geneva. And for me, well, I think Nicole said it best. No, we are nature, and we would do well to remember that. And I think if we do remember that, when we do remember that, it's so good for everything, right? Our mental health, our systems, or our societies. So this is very much a very important conversation for all of us.
Thank you, Marie-Laure. Atossa, you're joining us from Brazil, and we are so happy for you about the election. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Atossa Soltani. I'm the global coordinator for an indigenous-led initiative called the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative. It's 30 indigenous nations working to protect the headwaters of the Amazon. I'm also the founder and board president of Amazon Watch. I would say the reason I find that the conversation about nature is so important, so vital, is that for me personally, had an epiphany early on in my early 20s about Gaia, the living earth, the idea that the earth is a living superorganism, and that we are cells in the body of this living earth. And then when we remember that we have a host and we are, in service to the host, we feel connected. We feel this divine connection to all creation. And for me, that was both a scientific paradigm shift and a spiritual awakening to recognize the living earth. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Atossa. This is really touching my heart, Mother Earth, and all of us relying on Mother Earth for our life. Shristi, you're joining from Nepal. We're so happy to have you here.
Firstly, namaste and a very warm good evening to all of you from Nepal. It's evening right now. So my name is Shristi Adhikari and I recently graduated in Bachelor in Agriculture Science. So I have been working as a volunteer in Sea Changes Climate and talking about nature. My answer is quite similar to Leila only. I will say is like coming back from a global south country like Nepal, which is worldwide known as Himalayan country. So I should say that, yes, I'm the daughter of Himalayan region. So of course, for me, nature is definitely life. And furthermore, my name is Shristi, which itself meaning is a creation. So there is a name, there is a meaning of creation within my name. So of course, nature is so much close and it's life for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shristi. So we're going to start with our dialogue now. We want to share your vision. We want to hear about you, actually, about your vision on what's needed for a systemic transformation, in particular on food, forest, and nature. The reason also why we were hosting this summit today is that we want to share top recommendations to the leaders who are going to be in Sharm el-Sheikh on Monday. So also keeping that in mind, what is the message we want to send to COP today as a global movement, She Changes Climate, but not only as women, we are declaring an emergency. This is an emergency for climate, for people and nature. So what are the urgent actions that leaders need to take? And now really focusing on forest, food, and nature. So starting with you, Ryan, and we're going to listen to 3 speakers, and then I will try to take questions from the chat as much as possible. Over to you, Ryan.
Sure, thank you so much. My message is quite short, it's quite simple. Why am I here today not representing the male gender at all? Just representing what I see as a common problem among several groups when it comes to decision-making spaces. Women are not the only ones in terms of groups who are being marginalized when it comes to decision-making spaces. I here am representing young people's voices, which has also been marginalized, right? There's also indigenous communities who have also been marginalized. And as well, several groups might emerge that also have been marginalized. So I think the common problem here is being excluded for different reasons. Women are excluded from decision-making spaces for whatever reason that the oligarchy decides or states. Young people are excluded because of other reasons as well. And then indigenous people and others are all excluded. So I think we all belong to one common ground, which is being excluded as central stakeholders in the fight for climate change and climate justice. On the positive message, for me personally, over 95, or let me put it as 80%, just as a good number, is that most of the people I work with self-identify as women. And so I don't think that we are at a phase where we still need to prove anything that women are good enough or that they should be in this space. And most of the people I work with are decision makers themselves. They're leading organizations. They're leading entire movements by themselves, even as young people even. And so I don't think that there needs to be a discussion of why this group in society needs to be involved. I think they've proved more than enough. So the third thing is, when it comes to food systems in specific and to nature, women are amongst the group that is most affected by the effects of climate change. And we've seen through several research studies that when they are empowered at a rural level, of course, not at the top decision-making space, a lot of the acceleration that we need to do to push forward food systems accelerate, actually, because you're involving all the marginalized groups that play a huge role but are still excluded. My final message is any day, at any point, several groups might emerge that have been excluded. What I try to call for is to be against the idea of polarization, that not just because one group is excluded, then this group wants to have whatever it's been excluded from for itself. Know that we are all part of a solidarity movement, and that is the solution. I assume that all the groups who identify as being excluded, that they all become part of a solidarity movement, and we don't isolate them. So what I say is, for example, the youth movement joins the women movement, joins the indigenous movement, joins all of the other movements as a form of solidarity, because we have been excluded and because we are major agents in this transformation. That's what I try to call against, is to polarize these approaches. So yeah, let me just stop there, just because.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Excellent. How do we go from exclusion to inclusion, and also valuing the diversity of these voices, women, youth, indigenous people? Very, very interesting, and going from division to unity in a way, and this solidarity movement. That's quite a big challenge. So Leila, over to you. You are also from the Middle East. What's your vision on what we need to change?
Quite a broad vision. I'm going to try to summarize this. And I actually really liked what Ryan was saying, and I'm going to build a bit on this and maybe bring a bit of a different perspective. I mean, we know there's no doubt, climate change is here, climate change, it's real, and it's really happening. I mean, it's affecting all of us and whoever we are, wherever we are, but I think it's also affecting some people differently than others. So, I mean, like Ryan was saying, I mean, women are disproportionately experiencing the effects of climate change. And actually, if this is happening this way, it's because our basic rights until now continues to be hindered, and they continues to be denied in different ways and to different degrees. And this is very particular in the Global South and very particular to the MENA region as well. So we know that, I mean, gender inequality makes women, especially the poorest of us, more vulnerable to, growing inequalities, environmental tension, and climate impacts. So, for example, we've seen recently, in Pakistan with the floods, we've seen these horrible images of, people being displaced. A lot of them were women with very young children. So for me, it seems that there's a link between the way we are exploiting and destroying our natural ecosystem and the way we women and young girls are oppressed and excluded. So I think if we actually want to see true change, and we need to start by tackling the roots of the problem. We need to tackle the system that hinders women's basic rights. So if you look, for example, at rural communities and farming communities, especially in patriarchal societies, like in Africa or in the MENA region. And by the way, speaking of the MENA region, I want to highlight something, that the MENA has the largest gender gap globally. So, I mean, in these societies, men are always favored in the inheritance of land or property over women. We also see that there is a power imbalance between the two gender groups, and with women and young people also, who are routinely marginalized from decision-making processes. And these decision-making processes are directly affecting their lives and making them more vulnerable. So so the way I see it is that if we want to change and if we want to break the system that hinders women's rights, we need actually to work collectively in alliances. This is something that Ryan also mentioned. We need to bring in everyone together and have strong alliances, multi-stakeholder ones, which are inclusive to women, and especially in decision-making processes, not just inclusive to women, like, okay, here we are, we have women with us, but women really have to be included in the decision making. And these alliances will enable an environment where women become leaders in environmental conservation and natural regeneration.
Thank you, Leila.
Yes.
Just you've been talking about your experience in the Middle East, but I know you're also working on forests, on rainforests in particular. So how do you see the role of women who are really on the front line of climate impacts, but also trying to protect these forests? Because, you know, Bianca was just saying in the chat now that women are being impacted by climate change, but they are also change makers. Do you have a few stories about change makers, you know, protecting the forest?
Yeah, so I can give like concrete examples. So we've implemented a project that is targeting women in the Western Highlands of Cameroon. And this area is really considered as a high conservation value forest. And the objectives are of that project are, one, to conserve biodiversity, and two, also to improve the community livelihoods by strengthening economic and social rights of women, and particularly young women. And the way we want to do this, or the way we're doing this actually, because it's being implemented, is by engaging them in what we call a community-based and environmentally sustainable landscape management. So how does this work? So we are actually bringing different actors together. So local stakeholders, national national actors. We're bringing CSO representative. And also we're bringing the private sector, because we need to remember that the private sector is also key, especially when we talk about, you know, the socioeconomic aspects of life and enabling access to market. So, and all together, all these actors together, they're enabling the right conditions to become more inclusive to women. So, and we have seen very, very positive results. We've seen women included in decision-making processes. And I think maybe before saying this, we're seeing even acceptance by other men. So men are accepting women to be included in these processes. And we are seeing also a big improvement of their socioeconomic benefits. And on the environmental aspect, we're seeing much better outcomes when it comes to forest conservation. So I think this is a very much of a concrete example on how women, when given the right tools, become leaders in forest conservation.
Excellent. Thank you, Leila. So Nicole, you are the director of nature-based solutions at the World Economic Forum, and you've been launching this amazing initiative called 1 Trillion Trees. How do you see the role of women at the World Economic Forum, which is obviously a male-dominated environment? Most CEOs are men. I was at the WEF in Davos, and I felt like a tiny minority there. But at the same time, you've been also, through your life, actually, you've been doing a lot for empowering women at the workplace. And how do you see this connection, you know, between women, gender, climate action, and forest conservation?
Yes, that's a big question, but so I think we can tackle it at different levels. There's obviously been progress over globally, right? Because the World Economic Forum and the people who come to Davos basically represent the power structures and decision-making structures in the world. And so we have seen progress in terms of, you know, at the political level, parliamentarians, chief executive officers, women, but there's still a huge gap, as we know. So progress is there, but it's slow. And I think if we look at it more from that angle, as was said before, if we want to really tackle it's kind of the saying of, if we want to address the problems we have, we need a different thinking than the thinking that created these problems in the first place. And that different thinking means bringing voices at the table that have different perspectives. So it means more women. It also means youth, as Ryan said. It means Indigenous people. And it's really only in this diversity of perspectives, different even approaches in terms of the cosmovision, in terms of the role of nature, the place of life in society. It's only with that kind of gathering and exchange of views that we will be able to actually construct the new models that are needed. So if, you know, to segue a little bit, I don't think that by tinkering around the edges, which is a lot of what we're doing right now, we are going to actually be able to address the crises that we're facing on the climate and biodiversity front. And so we need new perspectives, and we need a fundamentally different socioeconomic model. We need to rethink how we assign value, what we value, and to kind of shift our economic model from one that values capital, financial capital and profit to life and to regeneration. So could we imagine a model where each and every one of our activities was measured by the extent to which we regenerate life on this planet? And that means human life, but it means all of life, and kind of also to bring in this other angle of one health, right, where there can be no human health if there is no planetary health. So I've kind of segued a bit, but I think what I'm trying to say is that this linear progression is not going to get us where we need to be. We are in an emergency, and we need a shift. We need a quantum shift, and that requires different voices at the table. And it requires us to have a holistic perspective and to think also much more differently, not just kind of rationally and parceling everything out in pieces, but also to understand these holistic perspectives of reciprocity with the earth as a living being, that actually provides us everything we need to live in every day of our lives. And it's almost, there's so many different dimensions, but we need today to be able to bridge them in a systemic approach that's not just cross-sector, but that's almost cross philosophical dimensions. And I do think Indigenous peoples also have a lot to bring us in that sense, to help us actually rebuild these new models for tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Nicole. This is really so clear. How do we make sure nature is at the center of society, and valuing nature also in our economy, going beyond GDP growth? I would love to hear from people if you have questions. I have a burning question for you, Nicole. How do you deal with this tension between our economic model, which is now so much focused on GDP growth? And yes, we can measure things in a different way. We have Marie-Laure here working on ESG, and others trying to make progress in the banking sector, in the private sector, to measure, to make incremental change. But if we need to stay within planetary boundaries, how do we, change the model? This is a big shift. It's not just measuring, it's also changing the paradigm of our society. So how do you see this tension between planetary boundaries and GDP growth? That's a big question, sorry.
Yes. So I think, I don't think we can necessarily get to where we want to be from where we are. I think there's like an intermediary phase, and that actually all of the efforts that are happening today are worthwhile. And, every step we take, whether it's in terms of looking at natural capital and how we measure it and how we, shift the financial system, whether it's in terms of nature positive metrics for companies and how they can start to assess their materiality and, try to shift that. I think all of this is extremely important and very valuable. And it's almost like you need, and I think observing kind of these quantum shifts, over time in history, it's almost like you need to build up all these pieces, and then at some point it can shift to a new model, which today we're not quite able to see yet how that's going to happen, because there's a sense of emergence. And all I would say is that as we're working towards that, just to keep the vision and to do everything we can to raise ambition, to keep kind of pushing in that direction with the tools we have, because we have to work with what we have today so we can move forward, until such a time that there's like a critical mass to kind of shift the whole system into a new kind of, a new norm and a new model.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So yes, there are solutions emerging, but at the same time, the clock is ticking. We're running out of time. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'm keeping an eye on it. So please do feel free to ask your questions. We want to make this dialogue as inclusive as possible and open. No need for UN accreditation to join today. If there's no question, I'm going to ask Marie-Laure. Marie-Laure, you are the head of ESG at Pictet Bank. This is, for people who are coming from different parts of the world, this is a very large bank here based in Switzerland. And Marie-Laure, I have so much respect for you. You've been pioneering sustainable finance for many years. You're one of the few women leaders in the banking sector in Geneva at the very top. it's also quite a tough environment. You're also a mother, I know that. So how do you see this issue of nature? And in particular, how do you see the finance sector? Because, you know, we're hearing about finance, banking, moving away from fossil fuel industry, investing in nature. But at the same time, you know, we know that there's still a lot of money going to fossil fuels, a lot of money going to activities that are causing deforestation in Brazil and other places. I know Atossa is there. How do we make that shift? Because, you know, if we look at this amount of money that we are investing right now, it doesn't look like it's going in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. So of course the change is not going as fast as we need it to go. And I don't think I need to spend too much time on that. We all know, and we've heard it, you know, systemic change takes time, and it requires this, you know, everyone to kind of get to a certain point where they understand that, you know, it's inevitable. What I'm really hopeful about, though, is to see the journey that this has taken just in my career span, right? I've been working in this space for 15 years, always in the area of sustainability, but the role has shifted from marketing and communications type of roles through to strategy, and then it's now anchored at the very top of these global financial institutions, right? If I take my my own example, right, and my conversations on a day-to-day basis are with the C-suite and with decision makers, where I am also often, as you mentioned, the only woman or one of very few. But what gives me hope is that we are having these conversations, and we are, and they are happening at the board level. And what is also really interesting is, you know, this whole notion of net zero, right? And people can be cynical about net zero by 2050. They can say we won't get there. And there are clearly a lot of challenges, right, that are policy, societal, economic challenges, which have been touched upon, which make it very difficult and slower than we'd like it to be. But the beauty of this target is what it's done is it's kind of put a foot in the door of change in a way, because what has happened is a lot of financial institutions, including our own, have committed to these net zero by 2050 targets for climate, right? And they started off with a logic of climate mitigation, which is what people are comfortable with, because that's also something you can monetize, right? I think the private sector is actually doing a better and better job on the whole redirecting capital, to your point, Elise, to renewables and to, you know, kind of changing our energy systems, not yet our food systems, but at least the energy systems of our economies. But what's happening is, as people are working through these net zero plans, because now they have to go from pledges to plans, there's a realization that it's all connected, right? And as you have more also women leaders or diverse thinking coming from, you know, working more with NGOs, working more with scientists, which is inevitable because financial institutions don't have these people in-house traditionally, so they have to work with other stakeholders. As they're doing this, all of a sudden they're realizing, if we don't tackle nature, we won't actually get to net zero, right? Because you have to deal with the sinks. You have to deal with the systematic destruction of our ecosystems. As ecosystems services go from being free, which is what they've been largely throughout human history, to something we have to pay for, that then has an impact on finance, you know, on the bottom line of the companies in which we invest, or the countries in which we invest. And so all of this is starting to kind of sink in and come together thanks to this kind of net zero by 2050 and moving from pledges to plans. And that I find very exciting, even if it's not going as fast as we'd like it to go. And maybe one last point, I think we've done a lot of work on getting data, but data is not enough, right? Since the mid-90s, there has been an explosion in reporting around environmental and social issues from the companies in which we invest. What has also exploded since the 90s is the CO2 emissions, is inequalities, is the destruction of nature. And so it is not through data and reporting that we will solve this problem. It is through valuing natural and social and human capitals at their right value, which is that actually finance is a means to an end, and those are the ends. They are not, it is not something that is on the side. And maybe one last piece that I think is really important. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, just finish.
No? Yep. Sorry. One last piece, which I think is really important and we need to be wary about, is fragmentation. I think there are a lot of initiatives that have been launched by investors, which are great, right? Like Climate Action 100+, which look to tackle, you know, big emitters, and we look to tackle them together. And I think this is very new. The fact that financial institutions are coming together to tackle these systematically important issuers together, because they know they can't do it on their own, together with NGOs, etc. But the danger we have today is people running off with different, like looking at this in a very mechanistic, siloed way. Water is one thing, nature is one thing. We have a plan for nature, we have a plan for climate, we have a plan for, you know, water, we have a plan for gender. And what I would love to see happen is, how do we connect all of these things? Because they're all linked. We need to all work on them together. And it's not climate on one side and nature on the other and gender on the other, right? And how do we bring that into the mainstream of finance? So maybe I'll stop there, but that's a little bit some thoughts
Thank you
on
so
all
much.
of this topic.
Yes, this is great, Marie-Laure. And I see now there are a couple of questions for Nicole and more questions coming. Please keep the questions coming. I'm taking notes of them. Over to you, Atossa. You're joining from Brazil, and I see also Bianca is asking, what can we do to make sure COP is delivering on nature? There's another question there about politicians focusing a lot on the energy sector, but not really talking about agriculture and food. So please tell us about Brazil, especially now that you've had some elections, and your experience also about, obviously, the Amazon, which is your lifelong battle.
So yes, I'm actually in Ecuador at the moment, but in one of the Amazon countries. But yeah, Brazil elections was a huge sigh of relief. On Sunday, Brazilians elected just by a narrow margin, but they voted out Bolsonaro and voted in Lula. And this is a new dawn for the Amazon, because the last 5 years, since Bolsonaro took office, we've been in the dark ages of basically for the Amazon. Record fires, record deforestation, and some of the highest levels of attacks on human rights and indigenous rights activists, indigenous territories being invaded. So it's been a nightmare. So we have, in his acceptance speech, Lula mentioned that he's committed to zero deforestation targets and that we're going to hold him to that. The fact is that there's a state of emergency happening in the Amazon basin. The Amazon is a vital organ of the biosphere. And when we see the Earth's living systems, when we see the Amazon is the great engine of the global weather system, it is the rain machine, the air conditioner, basically the heartbeat of the circulatory system, the hydroclimatic system of the planet. And I want to echo what Nicole said, is that we have to shift the paradigm of seeing the Earth from these political regions, from basically seeing the Earth as the living system, and seeing the rainforest, not just the Amazon, but all rainforests across the planet, as this vital organs of the life support system of the planet. We're in a state of emergency in the Amazon. The Amazon is one of the main planetary tipping points that's been identified that is basically happening now. Scientists thought it might be happening in 10 to 15 years, but it's actually happening now. The latest reports say that we've already lost 26% of the Amazon, way beyond the safe threshold of keeping the hydrological system of the Amazon working. And you've been hearing a lot from the global leaders around the need to protect 30% of nature, which is a admirable goal, since we've only protected less than 20% of nature so far. But the fact is that the Amazon requires the permanent protection of 80% of the forest cover in order to maintain that hydrological system. The fact that trees evapotranspire moisture and rainfall and generate basically atmospheric rivers that bring rain deeper and deeper into the continent of South America, but also across the planet. These atmospheric rivers generated in the Amazon are key even in North America for agricultural productivity. So we have to, one of the key recommendations is we have to change the way we see the biologically productive organs and tissues of the biosphere, and the rainforests, the rivers, watersheds, wetlands, coral reefs. These are biological productivity is the key to our economic well-being and prosperity. So we have to actually see how biological productivity aligns with financial prosperity. And I totally agree with Nicole that we really need to rein in the growth-based, material-based, extractive economy and that we need to basically degrow the materials throughput. Every year we're increasing the total stuff that we take out of the earth to a point where August 1st now is the date in the year, in the 12th month of the year, where we have overconsumed what the earth naturally regenerates. And so this is why we need to reduce consumption. And climate crisis is a key emergency, but so is the biosphere collapse and the mass extinction crisis, and they are all related. And seeing the silo of climate has actually, in the last 25 years, really prohibited us from acting from a holistic place of saying we have to, if we focus on the biological productivities of the planet as part of the package of also reducing human generated CO2 emissions, we will have a climate stable earth. And women, of course, are so just to say, just back to the beginning of my comments, there's a lot of hope for the next phase of what the Amazon needs to do, which is to protect 80% of the forest cover by 2025. And we hope that Brazil and Colombia and some of the recent elections are giving us the kind of leadership we need. And we have the first woman vice president, Afro descendant vice president in Colombia. We hope that through that, the platform of things like 100% recognition of indigenous lands, zero deforestation, leaving fossil fuels in the ground. The fact is that the Amazon is a place where still there's oil drilling and expansion of fossil fuel industry. And, the fact is that we need the climate agreements to address leaving fossil fuels in the ground. The climate agreement in Paris did not even mention the word fossil fuels. We need a climate agreement that addresses ramping down production and transitioning away from, from production. And, I was just reading the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty materials, which I encourage everyone to join and get involved with, that our governments are still financing $700 billion a year in tax dollars for the fossil fuel industry. So that needs to change. And agriculture is key for the Amazon. 84% of deforestation in the Amazon is caused by cattle ranching, large-scale farming. We have to address our food production systems. And we, in the Sacred Headwaters, we've been working with an indigenous-led alliance focused on this idea of a flourishing well-being economy, how we birth this economy that aligns biological productivity and financial and well-being, financial well-being, economic well-being, and biological well-being, all as part of this idea of a planetary framework, planetary health framework. And I think that, we have huge challenges to protect the headwaters of the Amazon and all of the Amazon. But in the meantime, I would say what gives me hope is that every day more women leaders are rising to the occasion. If you look around, almost every forest protection organization in the world, and in particular in the Amazon, are led by women. It's no coincidence we're hearing the call of the future generations. We're fierce defenders, and really women are closer to the indigenous value of being good ancestors to future generations. We basically embody that in our from our biological sense to our sense of responsibility in our world. So we're really big on promoting women's leadership, indigenous leadership, putting indigenous voices at the center of solution making, because indigenous peoples not only are the physically demonstrated they're the best guardians of the forest. Something like 50% of the world's intact forests are indigenous lands, and 80% of the world's biodiversity. So something is working in the worldview that indigenous peoples have to teach us. So not only are they good stewards on the ground, but they are also basically paradigm shifters for the way we think about our role as humanity, as I said earlier, as cells in a body of a living earth, and our role in terms of our effectiveness in coming together in alliances that basically see win-win-win, the well-being of all, the well-being of the margins. This idea of the people on the margins have a lot to teach us, and if we solve for the people in the margin, we will solve for everyone. And so that speaks to social inclusion. Anyways, I'll
Thank you,
stop.
Atossa. I see a lot of love in the chat. And I think it's resonating and actually addressing some of the questions about making sure nature is at the center and seeing human beings as part of nature, not outside. And I see Marie-Laure nodding as well. We have a lot of data and science. So what about action now to make this change happen? I want to hear now from Shrishti. Shrishti is joining us from Nepal. And she's also one of our youth leaders for She Changes Climate and part of our mentoring program. So please, over to you. Shrishti is going to share more of a personal story of the work she's been doing with women in the Himalayas. So just a couple of minutes because we are running out of time, but over to you, Shrishti.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I think it feels so good to listen from all such beautiful voices from all around the world. Like before just sharing, my story, like I just want to share is how, like before sharing what is the importance of a role of women in our agriculture sector, especially in the country like our Nepal, I just want to share is how much nature is important to us, like from our perspective, from the Asia perspective. So I come back from a country where around 66.67% people are directly dependent on farming, and more than 80% of the people are living in the rural areas. That directly shows like how much we are dependent on natural resources for our livelihood, and our 1/3 GDP is directly generated from agricultural sectors. But what makes me think more concerned is like today world leaders are talking about we are in the track of 2.5 degrees Celsius and we need to come back to the track of 1.5 degrees Celsius. We need to hold that Paris Agreement and everything. But I want to tell to the people, to the all around the world, that let me tell you that we are a mountainous country, right? Like people may not know like where Nepal is, because of course Nepal is a very small country. Maybe everybody doesn't know where is Nepal. But if someone asks, where is Mount Everest, the highest peak of the world, then yes, there is an answer that it is in Nepal. Then we are the mountainous country, and people are talking about we are in the track of 2.5 degrees Celsius and this and that. No, guys, even a 1.5 degrees Celsius is too hot for a mountainous country like us. Like it's erratic rainfall, and we do not have the big technology. We do not have, we do not depend on technology, infrastructure of development and nothing like that. We depend on the natural resources. We depend on the seasonal rainfall for our agriculture productions. So all these drought or sometimes erratic rainfall and this global temperatures that I just studied, that the report says that in mountainous Himalayan regions, the temperature is increasing by 0.6 degrees Celsius per decade. So which clearly indicates that we are not far away from the 1.5 degrees Celsius now. So even if it is not time to act, then when? It's a big question mark for us. So it's like, so because we are directly dependent on natural resources, it clearly indicates that yes, the frontline farmers are the ones who are affected the most due to this climate change. And in our country, more than 70s, I'm not at the same time, whenever I'm representing in my country, doesn't mean that it's not happening in other countries. I'm sorry if I'm saying like that. I'm just representing the case of global South country and taking my country as an example. Just my case is like that only. So I'm just saying like the country where, so more than 70% farmers are the female farmers. And out of 5 farmers, 4 are female and 1 is male. But still, agriculture policies, training, program, etc., all are based on the needs of men. But it's the women whose needs need to be addressed. They are working in the field. Yes, there is. It doesn't mean that there is no male farmers, but whenever we imagine a word farmers, that it's automatically there comes a male farmers in our mind. There is always a setup that the farmer should always be a male, but there are more than 70% female farmers in my country, and more than it's like male farmers are also working, and the divisions of the work is in such a way, the work which are more exposed to environmental activities like weeding, picking, harvesting, and grass cutting, etc. All these works are focused on women. They are the ones who are handling these works. And at the same time, their voices are not in terms of policy plannings and implementations. Most of the time, they are simply considered as helping hand. They are working in the field also, and they are carrying their household activities also, bearing the responsibilities of the household, taking care of the child, everything, but they are simply considered as helping hand. Most of the time, they are unpaid and unappreciated. And if even given a wages also, they are paid half of the wages compared to male, even if given the same work are done. So this is the conditions of the women of our country. Then isn't it the time to have their voices in terms of planning, policy making? Sorry, am I taking a long time?
I think we're running out of time, but obviously this is so important that women are in Nepal. They are the farmers who are actually also putting food on the table every day. Anything else you want to say, Pristee? Actually, I'm going to give you
I just want to add is like, I'm sorry if I'm taking a long time. I just want to add is like, it's the time, I feel so good to be a part of today's sessions. Like we all are coming together and, we all are being a part of the solutions. So I just mean like, if we just come at individual level, like if I'm just speaking from my country, then it becomes just, nothing. But when we all come together, it can be a great thing tomorrow. So it's time to let's come together and let's have a 50-50 vision towards our climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pristee, and I really look forward to meeting you in person in Egypt at COP and make sure your voice is being heard there. I think it's also very important. So I try to keep track of all the questions, and I will give them back to the speakers for the closing. So let's start with you, Nicole. There were quite a few questions for you in terms of how we make the 50-50 vision happen at the WEF. Also, how we make sure that leaders are walking the talk. There's always this impression that people go to Davos in January with their private jets. And then, of course, the closing question for you in this Women Declare Emergency statement that we're putting together. What do you think is really the top priority that we need to make leaders aware for the opening of COP? So this is 3 questions for you for closing.
Okay, I'm going to be brief. So the forum did commit to doubling women's participation between 2020 and 2030. One may think it's not enough, but given this again reflects the percentage of women in top decision-making structures, it's actually also a way to put pressure on some of the partners and kind of encourage them to bring a woman instead of a man. So there are things happening as well in terms of trying to action that. On the kind of walk the talk question, I think, of course, this is much broader than attendance at Davos. I mean, this is a global question right now around greenwashing and around all the commitments that were made, including at COP last year, and are we actually seeing the results? And I think that's where, what Marie-Laure mentioned, there are starting to be some accountability framework and some reporting obligations, not yet enough when it comes to biodiversity, but I think if we can have a policy change also in that direction, and that leads to the connection with COP15 in Montreal in December, I think there's a big role also of policy kind of to play in terms of mandatory disclosures when it comes to nature, so that we can start to make the link between what's being said and then actually what's happening on the ground. And then what is most important, I think this relates to your third question, Elise, which is to me, one, this holistic perspective, making sure nature stays at the center of the climate conversation, and that and this 50-50 in terms of women's participation at the decision-making level. Again, connecting to what we were saying before in terms of bringing different perspectives, bringing different approaches, and not just women, but women from the South, young women, young men, and kind of really pushing towards that and those new models.
Thank you so much. Diversity as a key to this systemic transformation. Leila, your closing word. What is the most important action that leaders need to take? The ones attending COP, but others as well. Heads of delegations, governments, presidents, CEOs.
I think I would totally align with what Nicole just said. I think nature is central to the whole conversation. It is important for both climate mitigation and adaptation. And actually, we need all of us collectively to conserve, protect, and sustainably manage nature in order to both reduce greenhouse gas emission, but also and very important, and we keep forgetting about this one, is to help people adapt to the climate change impacts, because nature is very, very important for adaptation. So I think this would be my key message: work collectively, conserve nature, be inclusive, and let's go ahead and implement ambitious ambitious commitment and implementation. I think this is really important as well.
Excellent. Marie-Laure, over to you.
A lot has already been said, but I think that point on everything is connected. Just like really stop with the silo mentality. Like there is one thing, we'll deal with this thing and then we'll deal with the next thing. Like no, you can't actually deal with the climate question without putting nature at the center. This piece on adaptation, The Economist came out with a piece today, a special report on 1.5 degrees. I disagree with much of what is said in there, but one of the things that I think they say and is on point is the business of business is adaptation. And they do pull that out to not just about their business, but beyond, right? That we have an interest inherently to help adapt wherever possible, and nature is key to that. And getting more diverse leadership around the table, and as Nicole said, at the top levels, because we see that when there are more women driving things on the ground at the municipal level, you know, at smaller levels of government, it works well. There's no reason that this shouldn't be the case as well at top decision-making level. So now we need to accelerate. We can't wait, 130 years or so for this to happen. It will be a real problem. So more diversity of thought. And adaptation must be front and center, because 1.5 degrees, as was said by Shristi, is too high.
Excellent. Shristi, I see there's also a question from Carly, where your last word on top recommendation for COP, but also what do you need, you know, to be supported as a youth leader from the Global South? What do you think is needed to support people like you to make your voice heard at COP and other forums? Over to you, Shristi.
I just want to say is for us, you know, like for a youth like us, COP was something, it's a dream, you know. To be honest, before going to COP26, we have not even heard about, okay, there is something like COP. There is something like people gathered together from all around the world just to, you know, and what are they doing? They are talking every year, talking about, we just had heard about COP21, that Paris Agreement, and thought that it's a history. It's something occurs just once in a history, but it's something occurring annually. That was a big surprising thing for us when we came to know last year that the COP26 and COP27, it is happening annually. And we just want to say is like, we have been working at the ground level always. We have been working to empower women from our side, but now it's from the world leaders, or it's from, I asked to my own government also to work from their side to, you know, like give a platform like us for a youth to raise our voice to be heard, and also to include all the exclusive community voices to be heard at the higher community level. It's really a time, even if I always say, like, if not now, then when? When is the big question mark always.
Thank you, Shristi. Atossa, one word. You've been saying so many powerful words already.
Well, I would say our goal should be 50% of all negotiating team of all governments be women. That should be a demand. That should be something social movements call for. If we get more women in the negotiating teams, we will get better results. That's key. We know that. Leaving fossil fuels on the ground. This treaty, that what comes out of Sharm el-Sheikh needs to address a global ramp down of fossil fuel production. The fact is that we have currently enough fossil fuel projects in the pipeline to be approved that would send us to a way beyond Paris Agreement, 4 to 5 degree warmer world. You know, so we can't afford all of the production that's still scaling. And the Ukraine-Russian conflict has only made oil companies more powerful, more profitable. There is something sinister about the way these conflicts are putting hold of, making the companies that are driving climate destruction even more powerful, more wealthy. 1.7 billion was committed to Indigenous peoples in Glasgow. None of that has yet flown. Very little to none has flown. Only 1% of all climate adaptation, mitigation, conservation makes it to the front lines. We need to support Indigenous frontlines, people who are the guardians of most of the world's biodiversity and forests and productive systems. And we need to center nature in all of these conversations in the business sector, but we need to be careful not to move nature out of the commons and into balance sheets and assets classes and, and the derivatives of nature, which only move it away from guardianship and stewardship of the commons. We need financial instruments, we need financial rethinking, but we can't do it at the expense of creating more problems, imagine. And lastly, I would say for the biodiverse poor countries in the South that have the most of the world's biodiversity, we need massive debt relief. The fact is, most of the countries, especially in the Amazon, for example, all of the countries in the Amazon, currently their external debt payments exceed their GDP. So what they continue to do is exploit resources, extract oil, gold, cattle, whatever it may be, to bring quick cash in order just to pay the interest on a never-ending cycle of debt and destruction. So we really need that. And lastly, I would say, women, indigenous peoples at the table, participating at the table, and of course, youth voices. The rights of nature is a paradigm shifting framework. And the fact that rights of nature put nature as a subject of rights is a paradigm shifting network. And ultimately, we need to shift the paradigm that is creating the rules, that creating the system goals. And
thank you, Atossa. Thank you so much. And actually, you're saying 50-50. Something we're asking the COP presidency to implement is a man and a woman at the top, a co-presidency, a tandem, co-chairing every single COP. We calculated that since COP1 in Berlin in 1995, when Angela Merkel was president of COP as Minister of Environment, there has only been 5 women as COP presidents. So if we would wait until 2039, COP44, to have gender balance. So we're asking for co-chairs, and this is really about all of us working as one team for one planet. There's an emergency. We need to go beyond egos, logos, and work together beyond institutional boundaries, beyond political boundaries, beyond GDP growth. I think you say that, making sure nature is at the center. And it's about all of us, men and women together, co-leading the future. So it's really an honor to give the last word to Ryan. Ryan, you've been the only man in the panel. I think we should really give you a round of applause. And you have the last word. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, I think the issue of inclusion isn't a physical one. I think it's a social one. So what I would definitely propose is a behavioral change, is to make it a social norm to accept everybody to be on the decision-making table, and making it a taboo. If not everybody's sitting there, then it's a taboo. It's not accepted. Even if the outcomes are great, it's still not accepted. Just as going to a university that's not 100% renewable energy run isn't an attractive university, make it not attractive not to have everybody there. I think it's a social issue and not a physical one.
Thank you so much. This is now time to wrap up. Thank you to the panelists. It's been an amazing dialogue. Thank you for all the questions that came in. We just have a couple of minutes now to hand over to Farhana Yamin, who will be hosting the next panel on peace and law. So thank you, Nicole, Ryan, Marie-Laure, Leila, Atossa, Srishti. I really wish we were together in person now to give you a hug. And thanks to all the participants for all the inputs and questions. And over to you, Farhana. Thank you.